Hi, this is John, and today we're going to be talking about layers and layer masks, and I'll also introduce to you Alien Skin's wonderful snap art by way of this demonstration as well. This again is a long overdue requested video podcast about these topics, so let's get started. This again is an image I use in my workshops to teach a number of different things with regard to Photoshop techniques. First and foremost, you're probably wondering, why on earth would you take a picture like this? Well, I was down at street level. This was a little ways up. I knew there was going to be keystoning, so I shot it much wider than I wanted. I really was interested in these three windows. That's what the photograph was going to be. So the first thing we'll review is our ability to use the crop tool to then straighten this image. If there's numbers like I have here in mine, we need to clear those numbers out by hitting the clear up at the top. Then we're simply going to drag the marquee over the entire image, or most of it in this case. Now you'll notice at the top it has the choice of perspective. We'll go ahead and click perspective. This is going to allow me to now pull the edges to where I want them to be. And then when I get done with this, I'll be able to hit the enter key and it will take care of the perspective issue, as well as crop it to the shape that I'm looking for. So I'll bring that down just a little bit, and I'll bring up these sides just a little bit here on the bottom. Okay, so once again I've used the crop tool. I cleared out everything, the numbers that were there by hitting clear, checked the perspective box. Now when I hit the enter key, I get exactly what I was perceiving when I took the photograph. Okay, let me move this Nik panel out of the way. Next, let's talk about layers and layer masks. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go into Filters, Alien Skin Snap Art 3, and we'll use this to create a painterly look. And if you're not familiar with it, in the new version of 3, they've lumped them all together now. All these different looks, pastel, pen and ink, and so forth, you can get from the drop-down list. And of course you can customize those. This is not a discussion about that, so we're not going to spend time. I'm going to make it look really blatantly obvious so that we can see the moves that we'll be doing coming up here shortly. So we're just going to accept this gaudy looking thing as a way to teach. And notice as this comes back into Photoshop, we have a layer over here in what's called our layers palette. And if I unclick the eyeball, that particular effect goes away. If I click the eyeball back on, it's 100% affected. If I look at the opacity slider here, this opacity slider affects the relationship between these two layers at this point. If I drag this down to 0, it's the same effect as clicking off that eyeball. Or I can make that effect be any level that I want it to be. So I can have it be at 100%, or that effect can be 80%, or it can be 60% or 50%. And so you can feather the look by selecting the opacity slider. Let's leave that at 100% for now. Okay, if we want to just have that effect applied only to the windows, which is what I wanted, and not to the wood, we would need to mask out that effect. So what we can do is we go down to the bottom here and we click on the icon that looks like what I would call a washing machine. As we do that, you'll notice in the layers palette, it has now put a mask next to the icon in the layer of the actual image. Now, in a mask, either you paint typically with black or white. And over here to the left is where we do that. As long as we select a brush, and if we hover, we can find a brush, or if you know the shortcut key, you can hit the letter B for brush. So we hover, we see it, or hit the letter B and we have a brush. So if we have a brush, we can then look here. If these are black and white, you're fine. If they're not black and white, you'll want to hit these two little black and white or the black and whites, the smaller ones I should say, up here, and that'll make those black and white. If we need to paint with black, we hit the arrow key here and that toggles between them, or the shortcut key is the X, the letter X key goes back and forth. So if we have white in the mask right now over here, it's revealing. So white reveals all of the effect, in this case, that we applied, the alien skin impasto. If we want to hide that, we would need to paint with the color black, because black conceals. White reveals, black conceals. So we have black selected over here. I'm going to go ahead now and I can start painting with black, and you'll notice that the impasto is being removed from the mullions or from the woodwork around. This is not a demo on painting, so I'm just going to go really fast. I'm probably going to miss some things, that's fine. I just want you to get an idea here. FYI, if you wanted to apply an effect to just a small area, what you could do is, rather than just hitting this icon down here and getting a white mask, you could hold down the Alt or Option key, and when you click this mask icon down here, the washing machine, it's going to fill it with black. And then you would paint with white and just reveal that particular effect in that small little area. Okay, something else to understand here to fill in your toolkit. Anytime you select a tool, in this case from the tool palette we have the brush selected. If you go up here, these will be the properties of that brush. If we click on this dialog, we can choose either a soft brush that has a feathered edge, or these, it's a hard brush and that would have a hard edge. We can use the bracket keys next to the letter P and make our brush bigger or smaller. In this case, it would be great to paint with a hard edge brush because you want to go right to the edges of those windows and leave that effect there. Okay, so a couple more things and then we'll finally understand the tools that typically photographers are going to need with regard to layers and layer masks. Okay, so let's say that we don't like how strong this effect is in these windows. We have a number of choices. The one we've already discussed is, at this point I can go ahead and bring the opacity slider down and make it just in the remaining windows be what I want. And that would be the logical choice in this case, because that's really the effect that I was after. But so that, because this is trying to teach you some techniques, I want to at least go over the brush and the opacity of the brush. So remember, the properties of that brush are up here. So if I bring the opacity down to, let's say, 20%, I can now paint with 20% over these windows, and it's going to take away 20% of that effect. Notice over here, if you can see it, it's a light gray in your mask versus the white. If I paint again over that same area, I've now applied it twice, and that effect is cumulative, meaning that it's now, the net effect is I've painted 40% of that effect away. If I paint again, I've taken 60% of it away. If I paint again, 80%. And when I do that, I'm down to what I did by using the opacity slider. The reason I point the opacity slider over here, the reason I point this out is I want you to be aware that you have infinite control by understanding how the brush works, and that you can adjust the opacity of the brush and the size of the brush, the hardness of the brush, or the softness, feathered edge of the brush. So, in review, if we need to add a mask, we go down here to the washing machine and we add the mask. In the mask, if it's white, we need to paint with white reveals, black conceals. So we need to paint with black to conceal that effect. We can change the opacity slider here to change how much of that effect is shown, revealing, a percentage level. Or we can use a brush and paint that effect in or out. So there you have it, some basic understanding of layers, layer masks, and how they work. hopefully from this, you'll understand the power that you have with whatever the adjustment you're making. If you just wanted to affect the saturation of the red, you could go to your adjustment panel and go to the saturation adjustment or the vibrance adjustment, whatever you want to do, and you could click on that and notice it's going to put its own mask in there, which is always common. Anytime you do adjustment layer, it'll put its own mask in there. So we could crank up, we could go actually to the reds here. We could crank up the saturation just on the reds and notice it bleeds over, but because you have a knowledge of layer masks now, you could grab your brush by hitting B. You could make sure you're painting with the color black. If you're not, you hit the X key and that toggles between black and white. You make the brush bigger or smaller by the bracket keys, and now you would remove, the one thing I'm missing is I need to bring the opacity of my brush up to 100%. And now I gotta start painting with black. There we go. And now we're painting away that saturation move and leaving it where we want it to be, just on the reds. So hopefully that gives you a solid understanding now of the value of layers and layer mask. And in closing, it's one of the reasons that Photoshop becomes so important in my workflow. I'm often asked whether, Aperture, Lightroom, they're great, they're wonderful. I have both of them. I don't tend to use them. I've been brought up using Bridge and Photoshop, so I tend to use those tools mainly because I want this ability to do layers and layer masks and fine tune, and like my last podcast, craft my images.